Hey there. Welcome to The Climate Cycle, a podcast focused on Canada's climate tech ecosystem. In each episode, we sit down with founders building climate solutions right here in Canada to better understand the challenges presented by climate change and what we can do about it. Hey, I'm Justin, the founder of Climate Tech Canada, and today we're exploring the world of nature and biodiversity monitoring. My guest is Nyla Ahmad, the Chief Operating Officer at Alvéole, a startup that's helping the commercial real estate industry better understand its impact on nature and biodiversity. When we talk about climate change, we mostly think about carbon emissions. But a parallel and related challenge is our impact on nature. Just as human activities are changing the atmosphere, they're also impacting the natural world. Things like pesticide use, pollution, and habitat destruction, much of which is connected to our built environment, are driving a huge increase in biodiversity loss. To put it in perspective, around 1 million species of plants and animals are near extinction, and about 75% of the Earth's surface has been significantly altered by humans. And this isn't something that's just impacting plants and animals. It also carries a huge cost for humanity. To put a number on it, more than $44 trillion worth of global GDP depends directly on nature. Alvéole is helping address this challenge by leveraging nature itself. They've installed more than 2,200 beehives on urban rooftops, helping commercial building owners engage and retain tenants while monitoring their impact on nature and biodiversity. In my conversation with Nyla, you'll learn about how Alvéole is harnessing bees as biosensors, why beehives are a surprisingly compelling engagement experience for tenants, and how the commercial real estate industry is starting to grapple with nature risk and disclosure rules. And now, my conversation with Nyla. Nyla, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. I've been following Alvéole for a little while, but a couple of months ago, you released this new kind of nature biodiversity monitoring solution. So I'm really interested to dive into that. But maybe we could just start with a quick intro to Alvéole, what the company does, and kind of the problem that you're solving.
Sure. So we are the largest global provider of nature and biodiversity solutions for real estate. So what does that mean? So our mission is to promote more sustainable cities and also foster a greater connection to nature. We focus on commercial real estate because we know that our built infrastructure is accountable for about 30% of the biodiversity loss. But we also know that commercial real estate has a really large opportunity to have a huge impact in nature and biodiversity preservation. And so our business is really focused on those nature based solutions that help our clients get on a path to being more nature positive.
Okay, that's a really interesting kind of contrast where part driver of biodiversity, but also an interesting tool to help grow it. Maybe I'd love to hear, how did you end up working on this? Like, what was kind of your personal journey? You spent some time at Rogers. I saw very cool at one point, editor in chief of Owl Kids, big fan. Yeah, I'd love to hear kind of your journey and the transition to Alvéole.
Yeah, well, I think for me, as you said, I spent, a long time at Rogers, but at Rogers, that journey was really about the emergence of the internet. So when I started, there was no internet. My first role was in publishing. I came from a publishing background and was very curious about how this technology was going to transform publishing. And of course, it went on to transform television and telephony and everything else. And I went along for the ride, quite happily because it was really about first something very revolutionary and then something that became very evolutionary. And so that is really what I like to be a part of. After exiting Rogers was really I just saw what was happening around the world on every level, like environmentally, socially. It was sort of in the midst of the pandemic and just felt that on a personal level, with everything that was happening around the world that needed solutions and with the skills that I had and the passions that I had, I just didn't want to be a bystander to all of it and took some time to educate myself. I was very interested in the sustainability side and learned a lot more about sustainability and discovered that from a business perspective, it's very difficult to measure and action and track. But also from a technology perspective, there was a lot of innovation that was going on. And put all of that together and really focused on built infrastructure and urban environments as a place that I would like to spend my time and focus because I'm a big city person. I think cities are really important and we want them to grow and thrive. But felt that, the impact on nature and biodiversity was something to really, think about. When I came across Alvéole, what was so eye-opening for me is that as we'll go through the solutions, it's actually a really simple and, natural place to start with beehives to have such a big impact. But also, I think as someone who comes from the corporate world, I'm very empathetic to this shift that's happening within the real estate sector and the need to start thinking about your impacts to nature and biodiversity and how are we going to get them to really action it properly. It really is about the data. So it's kind of brought together all of my kind of past experiences and just applying it to something that is really more purpose driven and more mission driven.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that resonates so much. I think maybe a good place to really dive into things is maybe just grounding ourselves in what we mean when we talk about biodiversity and nature. Because I think sometimes in the climate space specifically, there's a real focus on emissions and kind of that aspect of it. But biodiversity loss, nature, all of that is such an important piece of it as well. Could you maybe just unpack a little bit about where does diversity fit into this picture and kind of the relationship to these large commercial centers?
Sure. So there's such a strong dependency on nature and biodiversity. I mean, $44 trillion of global GDP is dependent on nature. But it made nature, unlike carbon, which is, easier to measure. Everybody can easily get their heads around what their impact would be onto climate or onto the environment. Nature is a little bit more amorphous. What is happening in terms of the regulations and the frameworks, the task force on nature disclosures is actually starting, the frameworks are there, very similar to how it started with carbon. And it's starting to be adopted into a lot of the frameworks that the commercial real estate industry uses. And green certifications are very important to our industry. And so we are now seeing a movement, it's starting to gain a lot of momentum whereby commercial real estate is going to not only report on their energy and their water and their waste and their emissions, but also disclose on their nature. So this is the part of this industry that I find fascinating because there is a real evolution that's going to happen. And if it becomes regulated, and in some places in the UK, they do have to report on their biodiversity net gain, the industry will be struggling to actually comply with this. So what we're doing is we're getting ahead of it as a company that has been focused on the nature and biodiversity space for a decade. And we happen to be doing it with bees, which actually are biosensors. So there is a real kind of natural data gathering from bees. Our transition to actually being more of a data and collection and biodiversity and nature reporting and monitoring for this particular industry is really the natural place for us to go. But we really are partnering with the industry to help them get ahead of what we believe is just around the corner.
Gotcha. Okay. That's so interesting. So it kind of seems like almost a parallel and related issue, like, climate and all of that is kind of driving some of the biodiversity loss, but it's also going to have similar economic impacts. You talked about the trillions of dollars that are connected to all of the natural services that we kind of take for granted. You mentioned bees as biosensors. And I think that's like a good kind of entry into what does this actually look like on the ground. I think, my impression of Alveole is, bees on rooftops, but it's obviously kind of grown into much more than that. Could you talk about kind of what that product looks like today and the services that the company's offering?
We offer sort of three types of services. They're all related, but the core of the business has really been on urban beekeeping. Commercial beekeeping happens far outside of the city. And so having a hive on a rooftop of all the buildings in the city centers and some of the most iconic buildings in the world, Empire State and all of that, it's sort of an unexpected place to see a beehive, which I think is the first sort of magical moment of our program. And bees are, very engaging. And so the hives on the roof are absolutely a very visible and physical representation of nature in a very unexpected place. But also it is coupled with tenant engagement programs, workshops we do around the bees with the beekeepers around the hive. And so the second sort of big program that we do and a value to our clients is that the commercial real estate industry has one big headwind right now, certainly post pandemic, which is this return to office. And tenant engagement is something that's very top of mind for them. And through our having the hive on the roof and then coupling it with tenant engagement services, we have actually seen it have material value to our clients in the sense that the tenants are engaged and they want to be in those buildings. And also, these programs enable the commercial real estate owners to get green accreditations and certifications, which is a value to them. Over time, through the beehive business, we have been collecting data from the hive because the bees themselves, when they go off and forage, they bring back a lot of data about the flowers, the insects, the pesticides, all of that. And so we're able to collect the data and start producing reports around what is happening to the nature around that particular building. And it could also be a bit of a guidepost to take certain actions to start restoring the nature around your building in your environment. For us, because we have such high concentration of clients in certain cities, the overall impact of each building, being more responsible and taking actions to restore and prevent their biodiversity, the impact in totality is very significant.
Right.
So the three are combined. I think there is the tenant engagement, which is really important to make sure that you have, your buildings are occupied. People are tending to appreciate buildings that actually do have more sustainability features. And changing the windows or, low water faucets are not as visible and as engaging as a beehive would be. And certainly the accreditation and having the data with what we believe is going to be more relevant in the future is also, a huge value.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Could you maybe just expand a little bit on what does that actually monitoring system look like and how does it operate?
So we take samples from the hive. So it's eDNA samples, which are then sent to a lab for analysis. We also use geospatial data to look at, the location. But from the hive, we can see the variety of the flowers that the bees have been pollinating, what insects they have come in contact with. We do pesticides monitoring also from within the hive. There is quite a lot of data that is brought back to the hive from the bees. And the data that is brought back is actually very actionable if you are putting together a plan to be more responsible with the nature around your building. And so, again, unlike some of the others, like in carbon, this is a very accessible sort of turnkey way to start getting onto the journey of understanding your specific site, the nature around your specific site, and building the muscle to say, okay, I have some data, I need to do something. I have some data, I need to do something.
Right.
Which makes it, I think this is very, very compelling. But the tenant engagement piece is very interesting. Like the bees, as I mentioned, it's very magical. And we have workshops that, we have over 2,200 hives around the world. So we have about 80 million bees collectively across all of our hives. And the workshops, over 40,000 people of our customers, tenants, our clients' tenants have attended these workshops. So the scale is, we're getting to have significant scale, but there is very high engagement of the workshops of the tenants. And we do see that when we look at our clients and their ESG reporting, there were ESG reports would have emissions and all of these numbers. And it's kind of exciting when you can include pictures of hives, pictures of your tenants engaging around the workshops. So it really is this first part of our mission, which is connecting people to nature, really understanding their connection to it. It really does come to life.
Yeah, yeah. That makes so much sense. And seeing such a visual thing in a report or for your tenants, I feel like it's very interesting too that you're also now bringing data and numbers to a conversation that has kind of lived in that more felt emotional
Mhm.
space. Like we have obviously a strong connection to nature, but yeah, it's hard to quantify it. So just find it interesting that you're now able to kind of also bring some data and numbers to that conversation as well.
Yeah, on the data side, also with nature, what's interesting is, again, a little bit unlike carbon, the nature impacts or what you would want to monitor for nature, if you were looking at it from a building perspective, it varies greatly by location. So that's number one. And then number two is that there is no single metric, no sort of hero metric that you could track. You have to look at a lot of different variables, again, because it's by location. And then the third is that, in this particular case, through the data, you could determine what sorts of actions you need, but also what's coming up is that there is financial risk associated with nature. And so you could have operational risk where your property could get damaged if there was flooding or whatever the case may be. And so I think that the data piece is very interesting even from an understanding and taking more actions around engaging with nature and being responsible with nature. But what we see happening within the real estate industry is this beginning to understand the associated financial risk with not only your impacts that you're having on nature, which would be your reputation and your shareholder value,
Right.
but actually reducing potential financial risk if you are actually more aware of what the nature impacts would be on your building.
Could you give an example? You mentioned like this provides really actionable insights. Could you give an example of like what some of those actions might be for a building owner?
So, I mean, landscaping and choice of landscaping, putting more, pollinator type plants would be one. We do pesticide monitoring. So, this is also being aware of where there are pesticides on your property and taking actions to reduce them. The easiest correlation is around the natural environment that you have influence over. So, the things that you're planting and how you're caring for those plants. And the pesticide monitoring one is really important because that is something that ties not only just to nature, but it's the water systems. It's a whole bunch of other things that in the municipality.
How do you think about it where I might be in an area where there's pesticide use around me, but it's not necessarily my use with kind of direct control? How does that kind of get surfaced to the property owners?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it largely depends on the owners and their connection to the community and to their municipality.
Right.
I think the first step is awareness.
Yeah.
Is awareness. And we also are able to use data now with the individual sampling that we do in the hive and also the geospatial sampling that you can also look at it at a portfolio level. And so if you are managing a portfolio of assets, you can get individual data about your individual buildings, which is also very helpful when you're looking at it from the portfolio level.
Yeah, I can almost kind of picture this like network evolving where you have like all these different nodes in the network, all this data from different buildings. You kind of have this network of data covering this potentially like large area is a very interesting proposition. Maybe we could switch gears a little bit and I want to talk about the commercial real estate industry and kind of like what's driving the interest on their end. You've touched on a little bit kind of a growing awareness and some of the green standards. But yeah, could you just maybe unpack like what's driving the interest on the commercial building side of things and kind of what's in it for them?
Well, I think that everybody is beginning to think about sustainability more broadly. And around climate and carbon, there's been a lot of attention and focus and a lot of actions. As I said, nature is quickly coming onto the agenda and, starting to consider not only the impact that the buildings would have on nature, but the reverse also, the risk associated, where if you are in an environment where nature could have an impact, you would want to know that and you would want to mitigate against that. So I think that's number one. But there is also, as I mentioned, potential regulation that would be coming around the corner where you would need to disclose. And so in order to do that, you have to be, or what we're trying to focus on is help our clients get prepared for that day because as I was saying there, it is a little bit more challenging to report on nature because it is very location specific. And so the second, I think, what is on top of mind, certainly for those that are more progressive, is they are beginning to understand financial risk associated with nature. And it is moving over into the investor and CFO office, which again, it's not that dissimilar to what happened with carbon and carbon impacts and when the regulation came into play. So I think we can look to the evolution of carbon and we can see some of the similar patterns having in place with nature. The other thing is, I think the tenant experience and being able to engage with tenants and get tenants who stay in your buildings longer. We look at all of the amenities that our clients have put into their buildings to that end. This is something very different. And this is something that not only will help you with your tenant engagement, but it will also help you to increase the value of your building by getting these certifications. I think all of those things together is why this is becoming more top of mind. And also, I think there's a reputational risk. You know, when tenants go into buildings, they want to know that the building has, they look at leads, they look at all the certifications, and it's starting to mean something. And so I think the reputational risk for the tenants, shareholders, investors, all of that is also coming into play.
Yeah. And are there specific customer profiles or industries where you find this is gaining more traction than others, or sectors that are particularly interested in this type of reporting and program?
Yeah, well, we primarily sell into the office space. And so I think what's most commonly on the mind of our customers, and I think the bulk of what we have how we have grown is really focusing on tenant engagements and how to have kind of more, reasons for tenants to come and lease the space in their buildings and also to retain them. But we do have customers that are in the industrial space, and we also have, multifamily buildings as well. But what we are seeing kind of growing fairly quickly because of the direction that nature reporting is taking into some of these frameworks, and because it is becoming much more, of an important topic, is looking at this nature reporting in anticipation of having to disclose. And they're trying to prepare themselves for that. And they are starting to really understand, again, like carbon and other areas that we've seen, that there's financial risk associated.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And I'd love if you could maybe unpack a little bit what's happening at the regulatory level. We just had a nature COP recently and some big kind of movement out of that. But maybe just for folks listening, what are some of like the bigger kind of moves lately on the regulatory front, and where do you see that heading over the next couple of years?
So, the task force on nature financial disclosures has put together recommendations, and we are seeing some of the frameworks from within the commercial real estate industry start to adopt them. In the GRESB framework, for example, now there is a biodiversity strategy question in the 2025 assessment. So that's a very significant signal that things are most likely going to change, very quickly. In the UK, in that framework, it's actually there is a regulation for companies to report and monitor their biodiversity net gain. And so we are seeing the change happening. These are very important, first moves. And that's why being able to capture the data, the relevant data, and to do it in a way that is useful and helpful, whether it's an individual building or whether they're looking for kind of a portfolio level view, this data it's important to have the data. And also, I think what we are really focused on is collecting the data for sure, but because we've been in the commercial real estate space for so long, is really having a good sensing and partnering with the industry to know which data would be most actionable for them.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So I want to maybe zoom back into the ground level.
Mm.
So one of the things I find really interesting is there's obviously like the software component to this, but you're installing hives on buildings. Like that's a very physical thing. Unlike some other companies, I would imagine there isn't like a local electrician you could like tap on the shoulder and say, hey, go install this. Could you talk a little bit about what deploying this looks like? What does that look like in terms of people power to get that deployed on the ground?
Very good question. I mean, there is an extreme physicality to this,
Yeah.
which actually is really exciting because it has scale. As I mentioned, we have over 2,200 hives, 70 cities across North America, Canada, and Europe. And it requires a beekeeper and, the wooden boxes for the hives and some bees and a truck and maybe a ladder and buckets of all sorts of things. And we also capture honey. These are honeybees. So at the end of the season, we are, harvesting the honey, extracting the honey, bottling the jars of honey, giving them back to the clients. It's the honey that came from their roof. So there is an extreme physicality to it. But like any business, any operational business, there is softwares and systems that enable this thing to function, efficiently. But the beauty and I think the uniqueness of this experience for our customers is that it is a bit old school. And you do see your beekeeper showing up in your building and going on the roof. And when you have workshops, you are taking the honey from the hive right into the jar. And so I think that's the magic in this business. And it really does bring to life, I think, in a very tangible way, what we are talking about here. We are talking about nature. And you made your point earlier about maybe we take it for granted. I think what's really compelling about having the hive and being around the bees and having that physicality, and it's human, it's not a computer, it's not software, it's real. And it does make you stop and notice nature in a very different way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the beekeepers going out and doing this work, are they, employed by Alvéole? Is this you're finding local beekeepers and contracting them? What does that kind of network look like?
It's both. So
Okay.
we do have beekeepers, and we also have partner beekeepers in regions. So we do, as I mentioned, we're in many different locations, and in some locations where we have a lot of clients, and it's easy to go for us to set up shop. I mean, we also have honey houses, extraction houses at certain locations, and offices and others. And so, in areas where we don't have that many clients, we do partner with local beekeepers. I think it's also really important for them to be local beekeepers because they are very much involved in the community. They, as I mentioned, they are doing workshops, and so we do both models of contractors or full time beekeepers.
Yeah,
And they're
yeah.
a very eccentric bunch of people. Like, it's really they're definitely one of the highlights. Very committed to nature, very knowledgeable. It's very physical work, outdoor, seasonal work. Not always easy. You get stung,
Right.
there's like some hazards definitely in the job. But it's as I said, I think it's something extremely unique when you're talking about nature. It doesn't get more natural than that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I was thinking like it seems like a challenging line of work. And I would imagine that having, if you're one of those partner beekeepers, having a partner like Alveole that you can also then work with and kind of supplement and all of that. It's like an interesting way to kind of boost that as sort of an industry as well and
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, and
kind of
it's a
support that.
combination. Like, we have in our ecosystem, those that have been beekeepers for a while, and as you say, this is a way for them to, get an income out of what they love doing. But we also have people who are fresh out of school. I mean, when the company started 10 years ago, I think it was people going from whatever their career was to beekeeping was, maybe a bit of a stretch.
Right.
But we're seeing more and more graduates that are coming out of sustainability programs or environmental programs. And so this seems like an area that it seems natural for them to be in the beekeeping business. Being an urban beekeeping business is actually unique in and of itself. And so to be able to do that, I think it's a very cool job for people, particularly like those are in New York or in London or in Toronto. You're climbing on some iconic buildings, getting some great views. Like, I think there is definitely there's an appeal to it from that regard also.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very interested. So you've been in this role for a little while now. When you've been able to talk to customers, what are some of the main things that you've learned from those conversations? Because I always feel like there's how things work on paper, and then you go out into the field and talk to customers or see how things operate, and they often aren't entirely the same. What are some of those like big learnings that you've had from seeing things out in the wild?
Well, the first are the bees themselves. We have customers that have been with us. They've been customers with us for a long time. And we have some customers where they name the queen. So they really, I think that the first thing is that, as a program to drive engagement, it definitely works. As I mentioned, there's honey that's harvested from the hives. There's a lot of anticipation waiting for the honey. They're excited to get the honey. We're even working on a honey tracker with a QR code so that, they can track the honey themselves instead of calling us all the time asking when it's coming. So definitely the engagement, is a big part of it. We are seeing, again, what's interesting too is we do have sort of a bee home, which is for just wild bees. These are bees that are not in the hives; they're living in the hives. They're like in their wild bees, and so the bee home sometimes the bees don't nest in it, and we can't control that. Right? You need to change the location, and you need to try a few things, and so it's been also there's another interesting conversation with the customer because it would seem in any other product category, you would say, well, it didn't work. But what we have to say is that, well, we'll pick another location. Or maybe other insects nested in it and not the bee home. So that's something that I think has been very interesting for us because having homes for wild bees is something that you could, if you can't put a hive on your roof, if your roof is not accessible or the hive is not the right thing for you, having a wild bee home is a really good thing to consider installing. But with it, some of it is out of our control. And so we're grappling with what do we do if nothing has nests inside the wild bee home? So I think that, and then on the data side, it's really conversations are starting. We do have reporting that we do for our clients today around the biodiversity around their area. But in terms of the nature risk and the financial reporting, what we are seeing there is that it's a new space. It's something really new to think about, even for us to understand how we capture, as I mentioned, the most robust and the most relevant and actionable data. It's what we're focused on, doing for the future. But we are really are doing it in partnership with our clients to understand, what they believe they're going to need to measure and monitor.
Yeah, yeah. So dependent, I guess, on the local circumstances and what's around them and all of that. Maybe we can talk about what's coming up next for the company. So I'd love to understand, what does growth look like today, and kind of what are the main goals for the next, 1 to 2 years for Alvéole?
Well, the first is really to scale our presence, as even though we are probably the largest doing what we're doing in the cities all over the world, there's lots of room to grow. Lots of buildings in cities, and there's lots of rooftops without hives. So scaling the core business is number one. The second is really strengthening our reputation as the sort of first choice for the real estate industry as they begin thinking about being more nature positive or having to comply with new regulations around disclosures and reporting. And so reputation is important for us. And the third is on the data side. It's just continuing to build the most robust and most relevant data set that is aligned with what might be required from a financial disclosure perspective, but that also is the most insightful and actionable and most intelligence for our clients.
Yeah. Yeah, that data piece seems challenging because it sounds like you're building this out at the same time as like the standards are being built out, or like, directly behind it. Whereas again, other sectors, there's tons of standards you can follow and all these frameworks. What has that experience been like, building this at the same time as everybody else is figuring this out too?
I think that's the most exciting opportunity that we face because it's not easy to measure nature. It's not easy to really understand the needs of this particular vertical. And we've been focused on this vertical for more than a decade. And I think it is really exciting to be at the forefront of something, but also to being at the forefront of it on behalf of our customers. So we're doing this to make sure that they are prepared for what we believe is going to happen in the future. And, today in this world, there's a lot of data. Data is not in short supply. And so the real magic is figuring out, with geospatial data, with our own sampling collection from the hives, as we scale more, we will be able to get more data, localized data, different regions, using different kinds of technologies to track other things, whether it's something that we need to put a pesticide strip in a hive, or if we want to put some bioacoustic thing in a hive, we have the ability, we have almost like a network that we can use to do more sensing. So we're figuring it out, as we go, as you say, like it is sort of all happening at the same time. But I think that's the exciting part.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so as you're thinking about kind of growing and getting onto more of those rooftops and driving that adoption, it's also an interesting economic climate because we have, high inflation, there's a lot of uncertainty, but you also pointed to, commercial buildings are grappling with vacancy rates. I'm curious, for commercial building owners, how aware are they of nature disclosures as something that is coming? Like, is that something you find you have to help create that awareness, or are they already there and it's kind of more of a how do we do it type of question?
I don't think they're already all there, but it is a topic in a lot of the industry conferences. A lot of members of our leadership team are on panels and, think back to kind of any emergent trend that
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
ever come across in your lifetime. That's how it starts. People start talking about it and they start making the panel circuit and it starts popping up in all the industry newsletters. And that's kind of where we're at. The speed at which it's going to happen is, everyone's guess, but we believe it's inevitable. It will happen to some degree. But I think it's the emerging. And that's why for us too, I would say that, focusing on reputation is one of the things that we focus on next is really important because we can do the job of raising the awareness so that no one in our sector and certainly not any of our customers would get blindsided by anything that might be happening to them.
Right, right, absolutely. And so if you're kind of looking forward and this is an emerging trend that is kind of growing, what are some of the big policy or other types of supports that you would like to see more of in this space to help accelerate that adoption?
Well, we believe not to underestimate the power of connecting people to nature. Like that is a very important foundational piece to what we're doing and also to our mission of making people more aware and understanding the relationship to nature. But also it's kind of this we have this like two-sided opportunity if consumers and sort of those living, the citizens actually start connecting to nature and start caring about nature, they're going to be more aware about the built infrastructure that is popping up in their cities. And they're going to be they're going to be seeking more buildings that are more sustainable and that actually are considering their nature impact. And so building owners who lean into making sure that they are more driving more nature positive outcomes, and as they promote that they are companies that are doing so, I think the two sides will meet. And so it's very similar to any of the other you know trends on the sustainability side. You do have to mobilize the consumers to think about it and care about it in order to get the businesses to see the merits and the financial benefits, whether it's reputational or whether it's just, managing like stakeholder expectations or whether it's growing their customers. So I think there's two sides for it. Both are very important to us. They're in line with our mission. We are doing, that's why for us, the beehives and the workshops are as important as the data reporting engine. So we are really aligned as a business to be fueling both sides as much as we can.
That resonates so much. And I think it can be a difficult conversation in the kind of climate tech space too, where there's a very strong emphasis on technological solutioning, but that connection piece is really important and kind of, yeah, having that real felt connection to nature and the environment and all of that. I think nature is probably one of the less well understood types of areas in climate. What have you seen that people tend to misunderstand or kind of get wrong about this space?
Good question. So the first I would say is that there's a misunderstanding that biodiversity is and nature is not a priority. I think we've talked a lot about what's happening, what's coming around the corner with the frameworks. We've seen some examples of regulations being adopted or some disclosures being put into the framework. So it's coming and it's going to be a priority. And I think everybody, should get prepared. The second misunderstanding is that your nature and biodiversity strategy is not separate from your tenant engagement strategy. They need to go hand in hand, and it's a very compelling way to move forward on both. And the third is a more personal one, which is we are not just a beekeeping company. everyone, everyone thinks that that's what we do. And the bees are our inspiration to so much. But, after a decade of being in this business, I think everyone who works at Alvéole knows that bees are just fascinating for many reasons. But one of them is the data that they bring back into the hive and how they can sense the nature around them. And that has been a really great launching pad for us to move kind of with both feet into the data side.
Those are great points. And I think they're all very well taken. I think too, not just being a beehive company, it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. And it's been incredible to see the company take the beehive business model and turn it into this data platform. And I think it's a very interesting way of creating leverage while still having that hands-on experience with nature. It's a very kind of interesting leverage point that's kind of been created there.
Yes, it's a natural evolution.
Yes, exactly. Well, I wanted to maybe just end with a quick rapid fire. Nothing too heavy, you don't need to put too much thought into it. We'll start with what's a piece of advice you would give to someone who's looking to make a similar career transition to work in, climate or nature related career?
I would say you have to really educate yourself into what's happening. It's an industry that is moving very quickly. I was interested in the technology side, so I was really interested in the innovation that was happening in that space. But I had to really dig into, which industries were moving forward with sustainability, what types of technologies were there. And it helped me to zero in on built infrastructure, which I would have never thought. I came from telecom. I would have never made the path to where I am today. And had I not done all that education, I don't think I would have seen what I saw when I was first introduced to Alvéole. And so you really do need to educate yourself and figure out where you are interested in, where you believe your skills can help. What are you passionate about? Because the sustainability space is really, it's very purpose driven. And, regardless of what role you are in, if you're in sustainability finance, you still have to believe in sustainability. It's a very purpose driven area. And so I think the real switch is figuring out, what is it that you care about?
Yeah. I'm going to go off script and just double click on that one because I think there's a misconception that you need to kind of stay in your lane when you're making a career transition. If you're a software developer, I need to be a software developer, or even industry. I was in telecom, I got to stay in telecom. What's your kind of reflection looking back on that transition? Any like misconceptions you had before that? What's your take on that as someone who's kind of really switched industries?
I think it's a real misconception that if you are in one industry, you have to stay in an industry, because a lot of skills are transferable.
Yeah.
And I think it's more, and from a career transition, is to get really honest with yourself in terms of what position did you play in the role that you had, and what other companies would require a similar position. That's the way to get yourself on a correct path. If you layer in with that, as I did, what do I care about? I was looking for much more meaning and impact at the end of my everyday. You start to get a little bit closer to not only looking at your next best move, but also the next best move for you and your happiness and your engagement. And I think if you think of it more in terms of position, was I a connector? Am I a good leader? Am I a good financial analyst? Am I a good creative person? Or whatever. If you start looking at it like that and get really honest about your skills and your value and your impact, when you show up at a completely different industry in the interview, they are looking to fill positions. They are looking for people who are going to be successful in the role. And I think today, having diverse experiences, bringing different perspectives, like every day I use something that I learned in telecom in my current job. I absolutely use lots of what I did when I was at Owl, which I never thought would be, it's relevant. But I've been very fortunate in that I always gravitated my career to where I'm a very curious person. I love things that are on the cusp of change. I love being surrounded by people who have a lot of courage to chase that change. And when I think of every role that I have had in every company in every moment in time, that's been the common theme, which was very empowering for me to say, I can completely switch, go into sustainability because I care about it. I just have to find the role or the position that is most like where I have been successful in the past.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective to hear, because I do think some people it's very easy to kind of get wrapped up into what was I, how do I keep doing that, and kind of trying to stay in your lane, as opposed to taking that broader lens of where do I have that impact and find my passion. Next question I had was any recommended reading or resources you would suggest to folks?
Oh, the list is so long, but I can tell you one that I was really a book I was touched by and surprised by, and I think it's inspiring no matter what industry you're in, which is the founder of Patagonia wrote a book, Let My People Go Surf. And I think it is really a story about a personal passion that drove an incredible business based on values and an incredible culture within the team, and some very smart business moves around how they were going to manage their supply chain and all of the relationships they had. Very brave and counterintuitive things that they did with their brand, positioning themselves. The most famous is the Black Friday, you don't need another jacket, don't buy this jacket. And I think it's just a really inspiring story, honestly told, with some amazing pictures of like mountain climbing and surfing and everything else. It was a real joy to experience.
Yeah, that's a great pick. Last question, any final ask for the folks that are listening?
Well, if you're interested in a nature journey towards nature positive outcomes, please do reach out to us at Alvéole. We'd be very happy to talk to you and explain what we do. So yeah, reach out.
Perfect. Nyla, thanks so much for spending some time and sharing more about what Alvéole does. This is really, really enlightening. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a rating and a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It would mean a lot and helps grow the show. To stay in the loop on Canadian climate tech news, recent fundraising, job postings, events, and more, subscribe to the Climate Tech Canada newsletter on our website. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.